A young enslaved girl peeking from a wooden cabin window, 1800s plantation. Charred ruins of a plantation house at night, smoke rising, 1800s. A leather-bound ledger on a rough wooden table, dim candlelight. Two enslaved children exploring burnt plantation ruins. A long, shadowed corridor inside a plantation house, sunlight through cracks. A frightened young girl hiding letters beneath floorboards. An old freedwoman sitting in a rocking chair, holding fragile letters. Close-up of hands holding charred, yellowed, plantation letters. A night scene of the plantation fire consuming the main house. Enslaved men quietly meeting under a large pecan tree at night. Smoke curling over destroyed fields of corn and tobacco. A frightened girl clutching her mother's hand in a plantation cabin. A slave overseer with whip in hand, shadowed by candlelight. A secret trapdoor under a burned floor plank, partially open. Two children peeking into a hidden basement room. A blacksmith forging tools in a dim plantation workshop. A scared mother comforting her child in a one-room cabin. The mistress writing letters secretly by candlelight. Enslaved women washing clothes in a creek at dawn. Charred books and papers stacked on a ruined desk. The freedwoman walking through a burned-out field, mist rising, silhouetted figures moving quietly through night woods. A young girl slipping letters into a cloth bundle. A plantation dog chained to a burnt fence post, tense and alert. The remains of a plantation barn, smoke still rising. A terrified overseer discovering ruins at dawn. Hands of enslaved people digging hidden holes in a field. A broken lantern lying in ashes on the plantation floor. The freedwoman sitting on a porch, staring at ruins in the distance. Two enslaved girls whispering near a creek under moonlight. Burnt-out wagon with scattered tools and goods. A child hiding under a bed as adults argue in shadows. Close-up of a wax-sealed letter being opened. Old plantation fence charred and leaning with vines growing. Enslaved men carrying water buckets to extinguish flames. Night sky above the plantation. Smoke illuminated by fire glow. The freedwoman, old, walking through overgrown ruins. Candlelight revealing hidden ledger entries. A young boy watching flames consume a plantation barn. Silhouettes of fleeing figures in a smoky night field. A close-up of a charred door handle, scorched wood. Enslaved women kneeling in prayer outside cabins at dawn. The overseer's shadow falling across a broken cabin floor. A secret meeting under the roots of an old oak tree. Charred remains of a rocking chair inside a burnt room. Letters tied with string, lying on a dirt floor. A young girl holding a charred photograph of family. Smoke drifting through the plantation orchard in early morning. The freedwoman reading letters under candlelight as an elderly woman. Silhouette of a child running across burned fields at dusk. A hidden basement door slightly open with candlelight inside. A torn dress on the floor of a burned cabin. The mistress staring out a window, anxious and pale. Enslaved people silently observing white men inspecting ruins. Charred fence posts lining a plantation path. Close-up of fingers tracing names in the burned ledger. A young girl hiding in tall grass during the fire. An empty, destroyed kitchen with broken pots. Shadows of trees cast over burnt ruins at dawn. A child clutching a doll amidst ashes. A freedwoman lighting a candle in an abandoned plantation house. Burnt-out wagon wheels, leaning against a tree. The overseer angrily kicking a burnt door open. A young girl slipping under the trapdoor into darkness. Candlelight illuminating a secret stack of letters. The freedwoman walking along a riverbank at sunrise. A scorched barn door swinging in the wind. The charred remains of a slave cabin with empty beds. Close-up of a wax seal broken on an old letter. Children peering through a smoky forest at distant ruins. An old hand gripping a cane, trembling over ruins. The overseer's shadow falling across burnt tools. Silhouetted figures standing in mist over charred fields. Close-up of eyes peeking through broken window slats. A burned piano with blackened keys in the main hall. Enslaved women carrying water across ruins at night. A young girl clutching a bundle of letters to her chest. Smoke rising from a half-collapsed barn in moonlight. The freedwoman looking out over ruins reflecting. A charred Bible lying open on a dirt floor. Hands clutching scorched papers tightly. Silhouettes of children running through burned fields. At dusk. Candlelight illuminating hidden writing on the walls. An old, abandoned wagon half buried in ashes. The mistress hiding in shadows, wringing her hands. Burned ropes and chains twisted on the ground. A young boy peering into a basement filled with letters. Old, cracked window panes showing smoke and ruins outside. A charred rocking chair beside the fireplace. A bundle of letters tied with string in an abandoned cabin. Shadows of trees stretching over burnt fields. The freedwoman kneeling beside letters on a wooden table. Smoke drifting over empty, broken barns. Close-up of charred handwriting in a ledger. Children hiding behind burnt trees while adults argue. A small fire still smoldering in the ashes at dawn. The overseer angrily inspecting ruins with torchlight. A young girl clutching her mother as they watch the plantation burn. Candlelight illuminating the freedwoman's face as she reads letters. The freedwoman walking alone through misty, overgrown ruins, holding letters, silhouette against morning light. The freedwoman also reflected on the moral complexity of the post-fire period. Not all acts of survival were noble. Some enslaved people acted selfishly, taking risks that endangered others, or choosing to remain complicit, with the white families to protect themselves. Yet Mary never judged these decisions harshly. She understood the calculus of fear, desperation, and human limitation. She insisted that history needed to capture the nuances of survival, not only the heroism. To her, the small, quiet acts of endurance were as significant as dramatic displays of resistance. Another critical part of Keynote 9 was the understanding that the fire and its aftermath exposed the fragility of power built on oppression. Mary said the plantation, though rebuilt in some respects by distant relatives of the master, was never the same. The enslaved survivors carried stories, knowledge, and experience that no fire could destroy. They understood that power derived from fear and secrecy could be challenged once the veil was lifted. And this lesson, she insisted, was vital. Oppressive systems are only as secure as the silence of those they dominate. Mary also highlighted the emotional toll of these revelations. Living through the fire, witnessing deaths, surviving threats, and carrying the weight of hidden letters for decades left scars that could not be healed. The survivors often struggled with guilt, sorrow, and anger. They were haunted by the faces of those who did not survive, by the knowledge of who had been sacrificed or betrayed, and by the recognition that survival sometimes required morally ambiguous choices. Mary said that memory itself became a heavy burden, one she carried until her final days. In her later years, Mary began sharing her story more openly. She spoke of the fire, the letters, the overseer's death, the mistress's hidden complicity, and the strategies the enslaved used to survive. She did not do so to seek vengeance, but to preserve truth. She wanted the world to know the full extent of the horrors and the ingenuity, courage, and resilience that had allowed life to continue. In doing so, she transformed the narrative from one of simple victimhood to one of survival, agency, and moral complexity. The freedwoman also emphasized the importance of documentation. The letters and ledger that had been hidden beneath the trapdoor were central to understanding the events. They provided proof of abuse, exploitation, and the deliberate destruction of lives for profit. They also contained lessons about human behavior, the fragility of social hierarchies, and the potential for courage, even under the most oppressive conditions. Mary believed that preserving such evidence was critical for future generations to understand not only what had happened, but why it had happened, and what could be learned from it. Finally, Keynote 9 underscores the enduring nature of memory and responsibility. Mary believed that survival alone was insufficient. The legacy of injustice must be remembered, the lessons passed down, and the stories told. The fire, the letters, the hidden truths, and the strategies of the enslaved were all pieces of a larger mosaic that demonstrated human resilience and the necessity of bearing witness. Mary insisted that the world must understand that oppression leaves marks, that silence can both protect and harm, and that courage can take many forms, some quiet, some bold, but all essential. In conclusion, the 9th keynote is a meditation on memory, consequence, and the enduring impact of historical truth. Through her life, Mary Elvira Johnson illustrated that surviving oppression is not only about escaping physical chains, but about carrying knowledge, maintaining moral clarity, and ensuring that history preserves the lessons of both suffering and resilience. Her story is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, witness, and eventually reveal truth, even after a century of silence. As Mary Elvira Johnson reached the final chapters of her life, she reflected on the ultimate lesson of her extraordinary journey. Keynote 10 is not merely a continuation of the fire, the letters, or the escapes. It is the culmination, the synthesis of every memory, every secret, every act of courage and endurance that had defined her long life. She believed that survival without understanding was incomplete. One could live a century and yet remain chained by ignorance or silence. True freedom, she said, came only when the past was confronted fully, when truth was acknowledged, and when the stories of both suffering and resilience were preserved for future generations. Mary's recollections often began in the ruins of the plantation, a place that had haunted her dreams for decades. She described the charred remains of the master's house, the skeletal framework of barns, and the blackened paths where the enslaved once worked tirelessly. To an outsider, it was simply destruction, the inevitable decay of wood and stone. But to Mary, it was memory made tangible, a physical map of human cruelty, endurance, and the moral complexities that had defined every day of life on that plantation. Every scarred beam and blackened floorboard told a story. Every scorched path was a witness to choices made under duress. By the time she reached old age, Mary had pieced together the broader significance of these events. The fire, she reflected, had been more than a physical conflagration. It had been a moral reckoning. It had exposed the fragility of systems built on oppression and the hidden sins of the powerful. The master's ledger and letters, discovered beneath the trapdoor, were the most tangible proof of this reckoning. They documented not only the abuses endured by the enslaved, but also the calculated strategies of white families to maintain dominance through secrecy, manipulation, and fear. These records, Mary realized, were more than historical documents. They were a testament to the importance of truth in confronting injustice. Mary often spoke of the responsibility she felt as a bearer of memory. She understood that her life spanned centuries of both pain and resilience, and with that span came a unique perspective. She had witnessed unimaginable cruelty, yet she had also observed incredible courage. She had survived oppression, rebellion, loss, and the slow, creeping weight of history itself. It was not enough to simply live through these events. One had to interpret them, preserve them, and teach others. She felt a duty to ensure that the lessons of her experiences would endure long after her death. One of the most profound aspects of Keynote 10 was Mary's reflection on the choices of the enslaved who had survived. She emphasized the subtle power in everyday acts of defiance, a hidden message, a whispered warning, a refusal to obey an unjust order. These acts, she said, were often invisible to those in power, yet they were instrumental in the survival and eventual liberation of countless lives. She recounted how, during the immediate aftermath of the fire, these small, deliberate choices shaped the paths of escape and survival, allowing families to move, strategize, and eventually claim a measure of freedom. Mary also reflected on the moral ambiguity that had permeated life after the fire. Not every action could be judged simply as good or evil. Some enslaved people remained outwardly compliant to protect themselves or their loved ones. Some white neighbors attempted to rewrite history or conceal their complicity. Mary recognized that understanding human behavior required nuance and empathy. It was this understanding, more than revenge or condemnation, that gave her insight into the larger patterns of history. She saw that survival often demanded compromise, cunning, and patience, and that these qualities, when applied wisely, could subvert even the most oppressive systems. Another central theme of Keynote 10 was the transformative power of knowledge. The letters and ledger Mary had preserved were not merely records of crime, they were tools of empowerment. By understanding the hierarchies, alliances, and secret transgressions of the plantation, she and others could navigate the dangerous landscape with insight. Knowledge became a weapon, a shield, and a guide. Mary insisted that this principle applied beyond her own life. Any oppressed people, anywhere, could leverage understanding to challenge injustice, survive, and preserve their dignity. Mary also addressed the long-term consequences of the plantation's collapse. The fire, the deaths, the destruction of records, and the eventual dispersal of the enslaved created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate vicinity. Families were reunited or permanently separated, identities were reshaped, and the legacies of trauma persisted. Yet within these hardships, Mary observed resilience. Survivors carried memory as a form of strength, passing lessons to children and grandchildren. They became living archives of experience, embodying the knowledge, courage, and moral judgment needed to navigate a hostile world. One of the most striking insights of Keynote 10 was Mary's understanding of time itself. Living to 132 allowed her to observe generations, to see patterns repeat, and to recognize the cyclical nature of oppression and liberation. She noted that injustice rarely ended with a single act, and survival often required long-term planning and persistence. The fire had been a moment of reckoning, but its lessons only became clear over decades. Understanding the past, she concluded, was the only way to influence the future. Mary also emphasized the importance of testimony, sharing the story of the plantation, the fire, the letters, and the survival of the enslaved was an act of moral responsibility. By recounting these events, she preserved the truths that might otherwise have been forgotten or distorted. Her voice, despite its frailty and old age, carried the authority of lived experience. She taught that history without witness is incomplete, that injustice left unspoken can fester, and that bearing witness is a form of both justice and healing. Finally, Keynote 10 is about legacy. Mary believed that the endurance of truth, memory, and moral courage was the ultimate victory over oppression. She lived long enough to see the world change in ways unimaginable to her youth, but she never lost sight of the importance of preserving what had been endured and survived. Her reflections were not only a record of suffering, they were a testament to human resilience, wisdom, and the capacity to transform trauma into lessons for those who follow. In conclusion, the 10th keynote embodies the culmination of a lifetime's observation, memory, and moral insight. It captures the profound realization that surviving oppression is only part of the human story. True legacy comes from understanding, preserving, and teaching the lessons of the past. Through her long life, Mary Elvira Johnson exemplified this principle, ensuring that the fire, the letters, and the experiences of those who lived under the plantation's shadow would endure not as mere tales of suffering, but as enduring lessons in courage, wisdom, and moral accountability.